Hi, and welcome to RBP on JSB. I'm violinist Rachel Barton Pine, and today we're going to be discussing the fourth and final movement of Bach's Partita No. 1 in B minor, the Tempo di Borea, and its variation called a double. By the way, if you want to listen to a discussion about some of the general issues that pertain to all of the sonatas and partitas, please be sure to check out the overview episode. So first of all, why did Bach title this movement Tempo di Borea instead of just calling it a Bourrée? Why is it a tempo of a Bourrée and not a plain old Bourrée? Well, I have no good answer for you. It's kind of mysterious. So I guess if we don't know why he said that, we just won't worry about it. Back in the High Baroque, there was a standard suite of dance movements: allemande, courante, sarabande, gigue. Many styles of music have their standard set. In Scottish fiddling, it's always air, march, strathspey, reel, AMSR. Well, in the Baroque, it was ACSG. If they'd had fiddle contests back then, that would have been what you would have had to play. So Bach, interestingly, deviates from that. He does an ASCB. Why did he substitute a Bourrée for the expected gigue? Well, there is one possible explanation. This could be more of a conspiracy theory than anything else, but I love the fact that, intriguingly, the greatest violinist of Germany of the time, Johann Georg Pisendel, wrote an unaccompanied sonata just a few years before Bach wrote his six. In 1717, Pisendel's sonata, which is a very interesting piece, neither one thing nor the next. The slow first movement, fast second movement could be the opening of a sonata type of thing, but then instead of continuing on like a sonata, he kind of varies into a partita and does a jig with variation. So the fact that Pisendel and Bach were buddies, and this piece is very likely to have been known to Bach and maybe even inspired his writing these unaccompanied works, or maybe Pisendel's playing inspired them, who knows. But it's intriguing that Pisendel wrote a jig and variation, and then Bach decided in his partita that has the variations not to write his own gigue and variation. Was that a little bit of a nod to Pisendel? Who knows, but it is intriguing nonetheless. So what is a Bourrée? It is a dance that was still danced in the time of Bach. Maybe Bach saying tempo di was a way to tell you, well, this wouldn't have actually been danced to, but it should still sound Bourrée-ish. So what is Bourrée-ish? Well, basically, it's always with a pickup, and 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1. Always with the and then the 1, 2 going to the downbeat of the second bar of every two-bar grouping. It may be that you might have played a violin version of one of the cello Bourrées as a child. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And so that is your Bourrée rhythmic pattern. And it's interesting that Bach adheres to that very, very frequently, though not always, and we'll go through that in just a sec. But first I want to demonstrate what somebody would do if they didn't know that, and you've no doubt heard this movement played that way. And so therefore that second beat of the second measure, which should always be the lightest of all, is being whammed upon da yum bum 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 ba da da dum bum instead of ya da da bum bum da 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 dun dun dun. So if you want to play it that way, by all means indulge yourself, but just be aware that you're not playing it like a Bourrée, so you're doing a tempo di something else. So I always think it's fine to play with whatever style you want, but it's important to be historically informed so that you know that you're not doing it historically informed if in fact you're not. Just so that you're making your decisions from a place of knowing what's going on. Okay, so let's see what Bach does in terms of making this Bourrée-ish. And 1, 2, 1, 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 and 1. Now he's not doing it so much. And 2, and 1, and 1. See, there he's not doing it so much. 2, not really. He's sort of going off. Maybe that's why he called it Tempo di Borea, because he wasn't absolutely strict about making every single 2 bars Bourrée-ish. I don't know. He called the cello suite ones Bourrées. He didn't tempo di anything with them. 2, 1, 1, 2, 1. And then your little cadenza. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. It's hard to talk and play. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And here's a cadence, and he doesn't do it. Going away from that second bar and back into it. 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And now here we get to a bunch of eighth notes, but they should still follow the shape of a Bourrée. So we have 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1. And 1. I guess that's still the same thing. 1, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. Even here, 2, 1. And 1, 2, 1. Sorry, I messed up the bowing there. And 1, 2, 1. Then little cadenza. And 1, 2, 1. So there you do get to end oomph on the last note, because that, in fact, 1, 2, 1. Instead of all of this elegant going away from the ends of the movements, here's your last movement, and you get to go to that last note just like I know you really want to. But of course, still elegantly. Yeah, so of course you want to make the opening very whoosh with those 4-note chords, but still you want to leave just a smidge of room so that the second bar is even more. If you're fortissimo on the first note, then there's nowhere left to go. So make it strong and exciting, but not quite your loudest. And then not, but a little bit of, and 1, da, 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 da. And like anything else with chords, play the melody without the chords and then add the chords back to make sure that it still sounds good. And I'll play a little bit of the second half without talking, just so you can hear what it's really supposed to sound like. Etc. Okay, so that spot we were just on, that is a real nightmare in terms of intonation. This thing. So I discovered if I start with a 3-1, I do 2, it's kind of a half step, 1, 2, back and forth here. I guess you could end up in second position. Or actually start in second position. And then you're right here for the 3-1. That's another option, which could work really nicely. Actually, in a way, it would be easier. I'm just so used to the 1-2, I haven't changed that bit. And then I jump to my 1-3. But the whole point is starting this note, the second to last note of 26, as a 1-3, means that you can then shift down a half step to the next 1-3 and then set your 2-4 on top of that. It's a heck of a lot easier than going 2-1-2, which is so messy. I mean, you could go 1-1-1, but 1-1-2 is easier and cleaner, and that's what I sort of stumbled across, or actually it helped me stop stumbling as much, but I accidentally sort of thought of that one of these days, quite recently, actually, after years of dreading that measure. Another measure that I always have to pay careful attention to, even after all these years, every time I perform it, is measure 61 to 62. I always forget which is the 3/4 and which is the 4/3. So I have to think and actually remind myself, like consciously, 3/4, and then 4/3. Usually if I get the 3/4 right, I'm okay for the 4/3. But every once in a while, my fingers go down clunk and do a 4/3 on this chord. They do some other, like weird thing, and then I'm like, oh, and so that's always really awful when you mess that spot up. So I found no matter how many times I practice it, I somehow can't trust my reflexes. I don't know why. My fingers get confused with the 4/3 and the 3/4, and so I just remind myself, dum bada 3/4, da 4/3, and then I'm okay. And of course, one of the hardest chords of all is the second to last measure. So after we go, then we have to find this guy. So one thing that you can do, because it is the ending, is you can take a little bit of time and you can pretend that you're taking time for musical reasons, even though you're actually helping yourself technically. So it's always nice when that happens. If that chord were randomly in the middle of some other phrase, you really couldn't take time and you'd be stuck for it. But here, we can help ourselves. So actually, that was a little bit strident. Let me try that again. All right, so you just give yourself that tiny little bit of help. Can be the difference between landing it and, missing it by a mile. Now, of all the doubles, of all the movements of the B minor partita, this is the one that feels the closest in spirit to the actual movement itself. It's not a complete departure because there's already a lot of eighths in the original Bourrée, and now this is just all eighths. So it's just sort of a continuation. So you don't want to make a whole big long break and then come back in like it's a new movement. Just give yourself a little bit of a breath and then continue on. So also don't end that like it's the big ending of the entire partita, because it's only the ending of the first half of the first movement, really. So don't make it come in too soon. In other words, not completely metronomic. Give yourself something like that. It's an exact copy of the other movement harmonically, measure for measure, phrase for phrase. So let's see where Bach made this one into a Bourrée. And 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1. It's even harder to talk and play on this movement. Let's see. And 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1, and 1. And then he kind of has a sequence, and it's not really Bourréing anymore as much. So this is a same cadenza. And then, and 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1, and 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, well, I'm not going to play the entire rest of the, I could, but you're probably getting tired of hearing me do that. So do it yourself, right? Every 2 bars, play. You could go slower because it's hard to do it up to tempo. Go slower, say, and 1, 2, 1, and see if it works. And sometimes it seems like it doesn't, but then when you fool around with it some more, it really does. There's a cadence at 37 that doesn't work, and then, of course, some of the other spots later on, really corresponding to the spots that didn't work in the main movement. So the only other thing to tell you about this double is that there are some slurs that are a little bit inconsistent, and the question is always, what should we do about that? So we have measure 48, which has the 2-note slurs at the end of the bar, and then measure 50, which does not, and then measure 61, which also does not. So did he do it once and then the idea is, well, do the rest like this, like as if he had written simile? Or did he want it once with slurs and the others more emphatic without slurs? I do indeed. Of course, it's slightly different, note ranges. The last one is, the two notes are a sixth apart. They're only a third apart in the first two examples. Right? So I actually do the second one slurred just like the first one. No real justification for it except that I like it that way. And maybe that's not good Baroque performance habits because maybe I really should have done it differently the second time. Let's see what it sounds like if I leave the slurs off. A little bit stronger harmony. Actually, that does make sense. I don't know. Maybe I'm just still in my old habits. Yeah, I probably should do that, but, well, I didn't on my album. Whatever. And then the last one I definitely do separate. But some people do slur them. But I would say before automatically thinking, oh, I ought to slur them, consider not slurring them because it really does work. Because you're going down, down, down. It makes it super emphatic, which that spot really likes to be. Now, another slurring issue. So in measure 49 and 48, by the way, we have 3-note slur here, 3-note slur, 3-note slur, 3-note slur, no 3-note slur. You'd think it would go, right? And we do have a 3-note slur in 61. But maybe he's slurring less as the music grows. So we have slurs, a slur, but no slurs, and then no slurs. So that makes some kind of logical sense, actually, the more you start to think about it. And I have recently stopped doing a slur in the beginning of 52, and I really like it that way. So always the important thing to ask yourself when puzzling over these types of matters is, can I find any reason behind doing what Bach wrote in the manuscript? Is there any possible way that he could have actually meant that? Any logical justification? And if you can find one, then really work with it and see if you like it before falling back on what might be the more common or traditional type of modification that we're all used to. And sometimes you really can't figure out, why was this the way it was? It doesn't make any sense. I don't like it. Forget about it. And then that's your prerogative because you're the composer and Bach is dead. But we have to give Bach enough respect to at least try what he wrote and see if we can wrap our minds around it. So those are some of my thoughts about the Tempo di Borea and its double. I'm violinist Rachel Barton Pine, and thanks for watching RBP on JSB.